This is TWiT.
Well, we've got something fairly scary to talk about because hackers are attacking the electrical grid. Now, last September, news broke that hackers had laid siege to the U.S. power grid, probing deep into dozens of energy firms, looking for weaknesses to exploit. The Department of Homeland Security issued a threat warning about an ongoing stream of malware attacks that could one day lead to what's called a black sky event, crippling cell phones, erasing bank accounts, devastating hospitals, and disrupting every sector of the economy. Girding our grid, some of which dates back to 1917, could cost $500 billion, that's with a B, dollars, too pricey for the more than 3,200 private companies that own the hardware of the grid. Now, the grid's enemies rely on expert hackers to carry out their attacks. Most of the utilities they target lack that same level of expertise, defending themselves with pencil pushers rather than professionals. That's because, well, there just aren't enough tech-savvy hired guns to go around. To combat this vulnerability, a federal task force is setting up mutual assistant pacts, allowing one team of cyber saviors to help multiple companies. Now, this would be similar to the kind of mutual assistance pacts that lead multiple companies to send fleets of bucket trucks when something like a hurricane or a huge winter storm hits an area. A hacker's ultimate goal is to own a master control center. Within these critical hubs, system operators rely on video-covered walls and button-filled consoles to keep the grid going. If a malignant program breaks through, it could corrupt the data that controllers rely on. So some power companies are creating duplicates. These twin nerve centers trade off grid control duties and can also access pre-hack backups, allowing workers to replace a virus-infected system with a clean version. An article in Popular Science goes on to say that when a huge power outage occurs, operations have 3 days to get things back up and running before food spoils, medicine and water runs out, batteries die, and the public, well, loses what little marbles they seem to have. Speedy fixes are vital, but that's difficult when the grid plugs thousands of power plants and even more customers into the same rather rickety infrastructures. Companies like PJM Interconnection, which serves 13 eastern states, administer organized market that help utilities obtain power from one another, which makes it easier to restore the grid. But let's remember, those switching and control centers have to be operational to take advantage of the power that's available. Now, Chee, I want to bring you in on this because I know that you spend a lot of time working with things like smart grid applications and research projects. From where you're sitting, how big a problem is this? Is this one of those things that is like Y2K turned out to be, a lot of noise about nothing much, or is this something we really should be worrying about?
No, it's definitely a worrisome problem. So in Hawaii, we have a double-edged sword going. We can't connect to other states. You know, it's a little tough, 2,400 miles of water. So we can't buy power from the national power grid. So our power plants are isolated. In fact, Hawaiian Electric actually runs fiber optics with their high tension wires to interconnect, have private fiber to interconnect power plants and switching stations and things like that. Not so much when you start dealing with larger continents like North America, South America, Europe, Asia, and so forth. You have to have interconnection. Days of having your power grid completely air-gapped is gone. We can't afford it anymore. We have to be able to buy power from cheaper sources. You know, maybe go up north into Canada to go get a lot of really inexpensive hydroelectric, or maybe if you're in eastern United States, maybe the Niagara power plant and things like that. So what happens is more and more of the smaller companies sadly have to use public infrastructure. You know, they might be lease lines, or they might actually, in some cases for smaller substations, actually use public internet. And, you know, then they go and do the VPN game. There's a lot of problems with all of this, and coordinating lots and lots and lots of moving pieces is really tough, especially when you start having to have something that's inexpensive. So like, for instance, if you wanted to have a remote switch that might be way the heck out in the boonies, you don't want to have to dispatch a bucket truck for someone to go and flip a switch. It might take hours to get there, especially if traffic's horrible or weather or whatever. So you start ending up using cellular. We all know that cellular isn't perfect. Just look at what happened to the Jeep Cherokee that got driven off the road after a hack. So there are some issues. The power companies are going up a very, very steep hill. And now as we start putting in more and more sustainables, those smart switches, smart inverters, have to be told to be able to crank back if we're going to overwhelm the power grid. So what we're having is lots and lots and lots of moving parts, lots and lots and lots of interconnections, and lots of places that could potentially be a problem. But what we don't have lots and lots of are we don't have a lot of cyber specialists. So JJ, you're in the chat room. We need more of you guys to help defend our national power grid. What say you, JJ? Curt?
Well, one of the things that I'm interested in talking about, as you point out, we've got this real mishmash of technology, both from a control standpoint and even from a generation and transmission standpoint. We've got some very new state-of-the-art hardware out there, and we've got some stuff that pretty much has Edison's signature on the approval sheet. So my question is, this mishmash, from a security standpoint, is it an advantage or a disadvantage? Does it make the hacker's job easier or harder that there's not one unified grid that we're talking about?
It certainly means you got to have more talent and more depth so you can learn how, so you know how to work all these different pieces. Some of these devices, let's just call them devices, are, like you said, pretty old. I swear Edison era. Some of the a lot of these SCADA devices are old enough that they didn't have internets then. They didn't have even intranets. There's basically serial, and then what manufacturers have done is they slapped on things. So let's use Modbus as an example. There's an awful lot of Modbus devices out there, and trust me, you ping them too hard and they will crash. At least some of the early ones. So some of the new stuff, like what BAE Power Systems is developing, is they're trying to go and say, hey, these old devices, these old Modbus devices and their ilk are past their prime. So as you start, upgrading, let's upgrade to something new. Don't cheap out. Let's go and get something that's actually designed to be on a network and also designed to have enough facilities to defend themselves against attacks. Tipping something over with just a continuous ping is no bueno. But having something that's, too expensive, also not bad. So, Curt, you're going to say something?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and it makes absolutely perfect sense. I can see the business problem being that what we're asking the utilities to do is spend an incredible amount of money, as we said in the prologue to this, up to $500 billion for something that doesn't involve new revenue opportunities. I mean, I know some of these companies, they would be thrilled to spend $500 million if it meant that they could get new customers or charge more money for a new service or even raise their rates. But I think they're going to have a real problem going to the public service commissions that are out there and saying, we need to have a big rate increase just so we can do the kind of maintenance that we should have been doing to keep our system from toppling over. Are you seeing anything from your interaction with the utilities that says that they're scared enough that they're willing to actually invest in this rather than trying to do only what they can pass along the cost for?
Yeah, obviously it's a balancing act. I was actually privy to a meeting that, was scary and also heartwarming at the same time. There's an awful lot of effort being put in. So those old movies where you have the two-man, in a Minuteman missile silo, and they both have to turn the key at the same time. The power industry seems to be taking that to heart. They're saying, okay, we can't afford to blow millions or billions of dollars on upgrades, but we might be able to afford, a couple million here and there. So let's do key upgrades and then start throwing in a lot of procedures. So I actually was at this meeting. They're saying, yeah, you can make changes remotely, but you can only make changes remotely from vetted locations, and you can't make the changes unless it's confirmed by a third party. So that's kind of cool. It didn't cost a ton of money to do this, but procedurally, it was taking a lot of cues from the U.S. military, which sounds like not a bad idea. And, maybe, just maybe, we're going to start seeing a lot more of this, using their money smarter to go and hit the low-hanging fruit, the places where you could potentially try and break in and take over a control center. Those are where they're going to hit. That's where the utilities are going to invest first and then move outwards as revenue allows.